There are things in life that look like kindness but aren't. Oh, I've learned that the hard way. And I want to tell you this story not because it ended well, though it did, but because of what happened in between. The part nobody warns you about. My name is Marcus. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer, retired 2 years ago, and I live alone in a house in Dearborn, Michigan that my wife Helen and I picked out together in 1998. Helen passed 4 years ago, breast cancer. The kind that moves fast and doesn't ask permission. After she was gone, the house got quiet in a way I still haven't fully adjusted to. You'd think after 4 years you'd stop reaching for a second coffee mug in the morning. You'd think the silence would start to feel normal. It doesn't. It just becomes familiar. There's a difference. My brother Gerald is 57, 6 years younger than me. We grew up together in Cleveland, shared a bedroom until I left for college, went to each other's weddings, showed up when things got hard. When Helen died, Gerald drove 8 hours from Charlotte without me even asking. He sat with me in the kitchen for 3 days. Didn't say much, just showed up. That's the kind of man I thought he was. Last November, Gerald called to say he was coming up for a visit. Said he hadn't seen me since summer and wanted to check in. I told him I'd make the spare room up. He said don't bother. He'd only be staying 2 nights. I said I'd make the spare room up anyway. He arrived on a Friday evening, brought a bottle of bourbon I liked and a tin of those butter cookies Helen used to order around the holidays. I appreciated that. It meant he remembered. We sat in the living room and talked until past midnight. About the old neighborhood. About our mother who'd passed 8 years ago. About his youngest, who'd just gotten into college. It felt like the old days. Easy. Comfortable. The next morning, over coffee, he slid a box across the kitchen table toward me. Early Christmas, he said. It was a smart home speaker, one of the nicer ones. The kind you set up in a room, and it learns your voice over time, answers questions, plays music, controls lights if you've got the right system. Gerald said he'd already set one up in his own house and loved it. Said it would be good for me, living alone. He could check in through the app, make sure I was okay. I laughed. I told him I wasn't so far gone that I needed a machine to babysit me. He laughed too. Said it wasn't babysitting, it was convenience. Said I'd love it once I got used to it. I set it up on the kitchen counter that afternoon while he watched. He helped me connect it to my Wi-Fi, walked me through the app on his phone. He seemed genuinely enthusiastic, patient, helpful. I remember thinking it was a nice gesture. Thoughtful, even. He left Sunday morning. We hugged in the driveway. He told me to call more. I said I would. That was November. What I'm about to tell you happened in January. I had a routine physical scheduled with my doctor, a man named Dr. Okonkwo, who I've been seeing for 11 years. He's thorough, doesn't rush, asks questions other doctors skip. That January appointment was supposed to be routine. Blood pressure, blood work, the usual. But about halfway through, after he'd gone over my labs and told me everything looked good for a man my age, he paused, set his clipboard down on the counter, turned to face me with the kind of expression that means a conversation is about to shift direction. He said he wanted to ask me something, and he wanted me to answer honestly. I said, go ahead. He said he'd received a call 2 weeks prior from someone identifying himself as my next of kin. The caller had expressed concern about my mental and cognitive state. Said I had been showing signs of confusion, memory loss, difficulty managing daily tasks. The caller had asked whether Dr. Okonkwo would be willing to provide documentation supporting an evaluation for a possible power of attorney arrangement. He said the caller mentioned my wife's death, my age, my living situation. Framed it as a welfare concern. I sat very still. Dr. Okonkwo said he had not provided any documentation because he had no such concerns about me, not one. He said my cognitive function was excellent for my age. He said the call had struck him as unusual, which was why he was mentioning it now. He said he felt I had a right to know. I asked him if the caller had given his name. He looked at his notes. He said yes. The name was Gerald. I drove home in the kind of quiet that doesn't feel quiet at all. It's the kind where your mind is moving so fast there's no room for sound. I kept replaying the weekend in November. The bourbon. The cookies. The speaker he'd set up so carefully, explained so patiently, connected to his own app on his own phone. I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the driveway for a long time. It was January in Michigan. The windshield fogged from the inside. I watched the neighbor's dog walk across the snow-covered yard, across the street, and disappear around the side of the house. I thought about what Dr. Okonkwo had said, next of kin. Power of attorney. Documentation. I'm 63 years old. I own my home outright. Helen and I had been careful with money our whole lives. Saved, invested, planned. When she passed, everything came to me. The house, the accounts, a life insurance policy that paid out more than I'd expected. I'm not a wealthy man by any standard that would impress anyone. But I'm comfortable, I have assets, and my brother had been telling my doctor I couldn't take care of myself. I went inside. I stood in the kitchen for a moment looking at the speaker on the counter. Gerald had connected it to his app. He had told me he could check in on me through it. I hadn't thought about what that meant at the time. I had just heard check him on and thought he meant something gentle, caring. I unplugged it. I didn't throw it away. I put it in a plastic bag, put the bag in the garage, and closed the garage door. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and I made myself think clearly. I am an engineer. I spent 3 decades solving problems by identifying variables, ruling out noise and following the logic wherever it led. I told myself to do the same thing now. Variable 1. Gerald had called my doctor and misrepresented my condition. Variable 2. Gerald had given me a smart home device he had connected to his own account and app. Variable 3. Gerald had framed both of these things as care and concern. Variable 4. I was 63, owned my home, had savings, and had no surviving spouse. I picked up the phone and called a friend of mine named Walter, who I've known since graduate school. Walter spent his career in estate law before he retired. I told him what I'd just learned. I told him about the speaker, the doctor's call, the power of attorney language. I read him the sequence of events in order, the way I would lay out a structural problem. Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Marcus, I want you to call your estate attorney first thing Monday morning, and I want you to check something for me this weekend." He told me to check whether Gerald had any access to financial accounts we might share, or that I might have listed him on at any point. He told me to check whether any mail had been redirected, or any documents had been requested from institutions in my name. He told me not to confront Gerald. Not yet. He said document first, react second. I spent that weekend going through files, paper files in the cabinet in my home office, organized the same way Helen and I had organized them together. Insurance, banking, property, investment, tax, medical. I went through each folder. In my email, I found something I hadn't noticed at the time. An auto-forwarding rule had been set up in my account, one I hadn't created. It was forwarding copies of emails from 3 specific senders, my bank, my investment firm, and my insurance company. It was forwarding them to an address I didn't recognize. The rule had been created the same weekend Gerald visited in November. The same weekend he sat with me at the kitchen table and helped me set up the speaker. He had been in the house for 2 days. He had used the Wi-Fi. He had used the spare bathroom down the hall from my home office. I printed the forwarding rule details. I printed my email login history. I printed the access timestamps. I put them in a folder. Monday morning I called my estate attorney, a woman named Patricia, who I'd worked with when Helen passed. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she told me to come in that afternoon. Patricia reviewed the documents. She called a colleague who specialized in elder financial fraud during our meeting. By the end of that afternoon, I had a clear picture of what had been attempted. Gerald had been building a paper trail, the call to my doctor, almost certainly other contacts I hadn't yet uncovered, designed to establish that I was cognitively declining and unable to manage my own affairs. The next step, had it progressed, would have been a petition to the court for guardianship or conservatorship, at which point a legal process would have begun that, even if ultimately unsuccessful, would have been expensive, stressful, and invasive. Patricia said this pattern was more common than most people realized. She said it happened more often to people living alone after a spouse's death. She said the people who pursued it were almost always close family members. She said she was sorry it was his brother. I told her not to be sorry. I told her I needed to know what to do next. We filed a report with the local police that week. We contacted my bank and investment firm directly and placed additional authentication requirements on the accounts. We had the email forwarding rule traced as part of a fraud investigation. Patricia sent a formal letter to Gerald through his attorney. At this point, we assumed he had one, notifying him that the matter was known, documented, and being pursued legally. I also changed every password, every account, every login. I had the locks rekeyed. I had a security consultation done on the house. I did not call Gerald. He called me. It was a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after my appointment with Dr. Okonkwo. My phone rang and his name came up on the screen. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. His voice sounded careful, measured. The voice of someone who was rehearsed. He said he'd heard from his attorney. He said he was worried about me. He said everything he'd done was out of love and concern. He said he hoped we could talk. I saved the voicemail and sent it to Patricia. There's a specific kind of grief that comes with something like this. It's not the same as losing someone. It's more like discovering that someone you thought existed never quite did. The man who drove 8 hours when Helen died was real, I think. The grief he sat with me through was real. But somewhere alongside that, or underneath it, something else had been present too. Something watching and calculating and waiting. I don't know exactly when Gerald decided to pursue this. I don't know if it was recent or if it had been forming for years, quietly, in the background of everything I thought was normal. I've stopped trying to trace it back to a beginning. Some things don't have a clean origin point. What I know is this. He had access to my kitchen and my Wi-Fi and 2 days in my house, and he used it. The legal process took several months to resolve. Gerald did not ultimately face criminal charges. The email forwarding was traceable, but proving criminal intent in a way that would withstand prosecution was complicated, according to the investigators. What did happen was a civil resolution. He was formally put on notice. The fraud report is part of the public record, and any future attempt to petition for guardianship or conservatorship in my name will be flagged and contested immediately. Patricia called me on the day the civil matter closed and said, "You caught it early. That matters more than anything else." I told her I almost didn't. I told her I was this close to hearing smart home speaker and just thinking it was Christmas. I don't have a relationship with Gerald anymore. I haven't spoken to him directly since before I found the email rule. I've thought about whether I should. I've gone back and forth more times than I can count. But there's a point past which reconciliation and risk become the same thing, and I'm not able to get far enough past that point to make it work. Maybe I will someday, maybe I won't. What I want to say to anyone listening to this is something simpler than anger or bitterness. It's something I've been sitting with for a while now. We are taught to associate care with the people who show up. Gerald showed up. He drove 8 hours in the worst week of my life, and he sat with me in the kitchen and he was present. And so when he showed up again, 14 months later, with a gift and a smile and a weekend of easy conversation, I received it the way I was trained to receive it, as care. I am not telling you not to trust people. I'm not telling you to live with your guard up until you can't let anyone in. That's not a life. That's a fortress with nobody in it. What I'm telling you is this. Pay attention to the small details. The things that seem like convenience. The offer to set something up for you. To connect things to their phone. To be helpful in ways that require access. I don't say this to make you suspicious of kindness. I say this because the thing that almost undid me looked exactly like kindness. It had the same face, the same voice, the same hands that had once helped me carry Helen's casket to the car. Dr. Okonkwo could have said nothing. He could have taken that call from Gerald at face value, filled out whatever documentation was asked of him, and moved on with his day. He didn't. He held on to something that didn't sit right, and he told me. That decision, one conversation, One moment of a man deciding that I deserved to know changed everything. Walter told me to document before I reacted. Patricia told me to build the record before I made any moves. Those two pieces of advice saved me from doing something impulsive that could have weakened my position legally and emotionally. And I want to be honest with you about something. In that first week, before I'd talked to anyone, before I knew the full scope of what Gerald had done, I sat alone in this house and felt something I haven't felt since Helen died. A specific kind of alone that has nothing to do with who's in the room. It comes from realizing that the version of your life you thought you were living isn't entirely the version that was actually happening. That feeling passed, not all at once, but it passed. I'm still in this house in Dearborn. The kitchen is the same. The neighbor's dog still crosses the snow in winter. I drink my coffee in the morning in the quiet that's familiar now, even if it's not always comfortable. I have my doctor. I have Walter. I have Patricia. I have my daughter who lives 40 minutes away and who I see most Sundays. I've updated my estate documents. I've had conversations with the people I actually trust about what my wishes are and where everything is. I have cameras at the front and back of the house now, not because I'm afraid, but because I'm not willing to be caught off guard again. There's a difference between fear and wisdom. I try to stay on the right side of that line. The speaker is still in the garage, in the plastic bag. I've thought about throwing it away. I keep not doing it. I think I keep it because it reminds me that I didn't miss it forever. I caught it. A little late, maybe. But I caught it. If someone in your life is aging and you love them and you are genuinely concerned, talk to them directly. Sit in the kitchen with them and have the real conversation. Ask what they need. Ask what they're worried about. Help them set things up legally and transparently, with their own attorney, their own documents, their own choices. If you are the one aging, make those documents. While everything is clear and stable and calm, get them in order. Know who has access to what. Know what your accounts are and who is and isn't on them. It is not morbid to plan. It is not giving up. It is the most dignified thing you can do for yourself. And if something doesn't sit right, a gift that requires access, an offer to connect something to someone else's account, a family member asking questions about your health that feels slightly off angle, trust that feeling, not to the point of paranoia, but enough to pay attention. Enough to make a call to someone you trust and just talk it through. You deserve to grow older in your own life, on your own terms, with your own choices intact. Don't let anyone take that from you quietly. If you found something in this story that resonated with you, something you've seen in your own family, something you've been worrying about, I'd like to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me what's on your mind. I read them. And if this story reached someone who needed it, do me a favor and share it. There are people out there who need to hear this before it happens to them. Not after. This is Voices of Uncle Raymond. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other, but carefully.